What if the person you trusted most in this world, the person who knew your laugh, your childhood secrets, your mother's name, was quietly planning to end your life? Not a stranger, not an enemy, your best friend, the boy you grew up with, the one who shared his lunch with you in primary school, the one who called you brother, the one whose face you recognized immediately after years apart, and whose friend request you accepted without a single moment of hesitation. Because why would you hesitate? He was your friend. He had always been your friend. This story broke just recently, and the investigation is still ongoing as you watch this video. What happened between these two young men is not simply a crime story. It is a psychological case study, a deeply disturbing window into what envy, real, festering, unchecked envy, can do to a human being over time. By the time this story ends, you will understand something uncomfortable about human nature, something that most people prefer not to think about. You will understand how an ordinary person, someone who was once capable of genuine friendship and genuine love, can become capable of something unthinkable. Stay with me, because this story starts as the most devastating stories always do, with something completely innocent. It starts in a primary school classroom. Two young boys sitting close enough to share a desk, close enough to pass notes, close enough to whisper jokes when the teacher wasn't looking. Let's call them Daniel and James. Daniel was the kind of child that rooms gravitate toward. Bright eyes, easy laugh, the kind of boy who made friends without even trying, who walked into a room and somehow made it feel warmer just by being there. His family was comfortable, not extravagantly wealthy, but stable, secure. His parents worked hard and their efforts showed in the life they built for their son. James was different, quieter, more observant. He had the kind of stillness about him that made adults describe him as mature. Beyond his years, he watched everything, remembered everything, felt everything, deeply and privately, in a way he rarely showed to the world. His family struggled, genuinely struggled, the kind of struggle that leaves marks, not just on bank accounts, but on the soul of a child who watches his parents work themselves to exhaustion and still come home with barely enough. And yet, none of that mattered between them, because in that classroom, in that particular way that only childhood friendships can exist, Daniel and James were simply two boys who made each other laugh. They walked home together every single day. They shared food without keeping score. They made the kinds of promises that children make, forever promises, unbreakable promises, spoken with the complete sincerity that only exists before the world has had a chance to complicate everything. They were brothers in everything but blood. And then, as life always does, it intervened. Primary school ended. And with it, everything changed. Daniel's family relocated to a more affluent neighborhood across the city. Better schools, better opportunities, a better life waiting on the other side of that move. James stayed exactly where he was. Same neighborhood, same struggles, same street corner where his mother set up her food stall every morning before the sun had fully risen. Two boys, same starting line, same finished tape of childhood friendship. But from that moment forward, completely different races. Neither of them could have known, standing at that crossroads of childhood, just how different those races would eventually become, and just how catastrophically those differences would one day collide. Years passed, the way years do, quietly at first, and then all at once. Daniel's world expanded. His parents' business grew. The comfortable life became an abundant life. By the time Daniel was a young man, he had everything that a young man could want, and he wore it openly and joyfully the way young people do when they have not yet learned to be cautious about visibility. Designer clothes, expensive jewelry that caught the light when he moved, a luxury phone that he upgraded regularly, meals at restaurants that most people in his city would never step inside, vacations, events, a life that looked, from the outside, like a highlight reel of everything the world had to offer. And he shared all of it on social media, freely, happily, without any awareness of who might be watching. Every expensive outfit photographed, every luxury location tagged, every new phone unboxed on camera, every meal at every upscale restaurant documented for the world to see. Daniel was not showing off in a malicious way. He was simply living his life the way his generation lives, openly, publicly, digitally. He had no idea that those posts were being studied, analyzed, that someone was scrolling through them with an emotion that had long since moved beyond simple admiration. Then one ordinary evening, a notification appeared on Daniel's phone. A friend request. A name he recognized immediately. A profile picture showing a face that had aged, filled out, matured, but was still unmistakably the same. Boy from that primary school classroom. James. Daniel accepted without hesitation. For Daniel, this was pure joy. The uncomplicated happiness of reconnecting with someone from a chapter of his life he remembered. With warmth and nostalgia, he sent a message immediately. Something enthusiastic and genuine. The kind of message that could only come from someone who had absolutely nothing to hide and everything to celebrate. About seeing an old friend again. What Daniel didn't know, couldn't have known, was that James had not simply stumbled across his profile by accident. James had been watching Daniel's page for months before sending that request. Months of scrolling through posts. Months of studying photographs. Months of noting locations, habits, routines, the texture and detail of Daniel's daily life. The friend request was not an impulse. It was a decision. For Daniel, this was a reunion. For James, this was the opening move. They fell back into communication with surprising ease. The way old friends sometimes do. Picking up a rhythm that feels familiar even after years of silence. They laughed about memories from primary school. They talked about their lives. They made plans, vague, friendly plans of the kind that feel meaningful in the moment. Daniel was open, generous with his words the way he was generous with everything. He spoke freely about his life, his home, his family, his routines. He had no reason to guard any of it. James listened to everything, filed everything away. And through all of this, across 2 years of messages and phone calls and laughter, James made the same request. Over and over again. Come and visit me. Come to my side of the city. I want to see you properly. In person. Come and see me, brother. And every single time, Daniel declined. He was always friendly about it. Always warm. Always found some reason. Busy schedules. Other commitments. That kept him from making the trip. But the truth that Daniel may not have even been fully conscious of, was that something made him uncomfortable about going. Some quiet voice. Some ancient instinct buried beneath the warmth and the nostalgia and the genuine affection he felt for his old friend. Something that said, not yet, not there, not alone. He should have listened to that voice. He should have locked every door and never looked back. Because on the other side of those 2 years of unanswered invitations, James had run out of patience, and he had started making different plans. James understood something important after 2 years of failed invitations. Daniel would not come willingly. Not to James's side of the city. Not alone. Not without a reason that felt safe and spontaneous and completely unthreatening. So James decided to manufacture that reason. He identified a mutual contact. Someone who existed on the edges of both their social circles. Someone whose name Daniel would recognize. Whose voice would carry the casual familiarity of a person who had nothing to hide. James approached this contact with a story. He needed a favor. A simple phone call. Nothing complicated. Just call Daniel and tell him you happen to be in his neighborhood. That you're passing through. That it would be wonderful, so easy, so quick. Just a brief, spontaneous meetup between people who knew each other. The contact made the call. And Daniel, warm, trusting, generous Daniel, received it exactly the way James had calculated he would. With immediate enthusiasm. Of course. Yes. Come over. It will be good to see you. He got dressed that evening with no particular sense of occasion. Put on his expensive watch, the one he wore most days. His designer outfit. His luxury phone slipped into his pocket. He told whoever needed to know that he was stepping out briefly. Just a quick visit. Nothing to worry about. He would be back soon. He stepped out of his front door. He stepped out of his safe and comfortable world. And he walked, freely, willingly, completely unsuspecting, directly into a trap that had been 2 years in the making. James and his accomplices were already in position. They had chosen their location carefully, planned their movements, assigned their roles. This was not impulsive. This was not a crime of passion or opportunity. This was premeditated down to the last detail. The moment Daniel arrived, the trap closed. And Daniel, in the space of a few terrible seconds, understood everything. Understood the 2 years of invitations. Understood the carefully constructed phone call. Understood the gap between the friend he remembered and the person standing in front of him now. But that understanding came too late. Far too late. They moved with terrifying speed and efficiency. Daniel was overpowered before he could react, restrained, blindfolded, his expensive watch removed, his phone taken, his designer clothes suddenly meaningless in the darkness of a room he didn't recognize. They drove him to a location he had never seen, down roads he couldn't track, through darkness that gave him nothing to orient himself with. When they stopped, he was brought into a room and tied to a chair. And then the photographs began. Methodical, cold, clinical. Photos of Daniel bound and helpless, designed to communicate one thing and one thing, only to the people who loved him most. We have him, and if you want him back, you will pay. The ransom demand was delivered to Daniel's family shortly after. $130,000. The family received it the way families always receive these messages, with a terror so complete and so sudden that it temporarily erases the ability to think clearly. Frantic phone calls, desperate prayers, a scramble to contact anyone who might help. Lawyers, police, anyone with connections, anyone with resources, anyone who might know what to do when the worst thing you can imagine has already happened. They began rallying everything they had, trying to figure out if they could raise the money, trying to figure out if raising the money would even bring their son home safely. But while Daniel's family scrambled, while they made their desperate phone calls and counted their resources and tried to hold themselves together, something was happening in that dark room, something that no ransom payment could have prevented. Because James, standing in that room, looking at the person he had planned and schemed and manipulated his way to this moment for, suddenly faced a reality he may not have fully confronted in all his months of planning. Daniel had seen his face, knew his name, knew his family, knew his neighborhood, had 2 years of messages and phone calls and shared memories. That would make him immediately identifiable to any investigator. If Daniel walked out of that room alive, James would never be safe again. The plan had always been about money. But now, in that room, it became about something else entirely. James turned to his accomplices, and he told them that Daniel could not leave that room alive. The decision was made, just like that, with a casualness that investigators would later describe as one of the most chilling aspects of the entire case. This is the part of the story that keeps forensic psychologists awake at night. Not the kidnapping, not even the murder, but the psychological journey that led an ordinary young man, a boy who once walked home from school sharing food with his best friend, to that moment of decision in that dark room. How does that happen? How does a human being cross that line? Forensic psychologists, who study cases like this, have identified a process they call moral disengagement. It is a systematic, often gradual, dismantling of a person's own ethical framework, a series of internal steps that each feel, in the moment, completely logical, completely justified. It never happens all at once. It happens in stages. Stage 1, James convinced himself that the gap between his life and Daniel's was fundamentally unjust, that Daniel's wealth was not earned but inherited, that the universe had distributed its gifts unfairly, and that this unfairness was not simply unfortunate but wrong. This stage is understandable. Many people feel this way. Inequality is real. Suffering is real. The frustration of watching someone else have everything while you have nothing is a deeply human experience. But James did not stop at stage 1. Stage 2. James began to convince himself that Daniel's wealth was somehow connected to his own poverty, that Daniel having more meant James having less, that correcting the imbalance was not theft, but justice. Stage 3. James constructed a narrative around his parents, his suffering mother, his exhausted father. He framed everything he was planning not as crime, but as sacrifice, as love, as the act of a devoted son who would do whatever it took to give his family the life they deserved. Stage 4, the final stage, was the one that happened in that dark room, where James looked at Daniel, his childhood friend, his brother in everything but blood, and completed the final step of moral disengagement. He stopped seeing a person. He saw a problem. He saw an obstacle between himself and everything he had convinced himself he deserved. This is what unchecked envy does. Not quickly, not dramatically, but slowly, quietly, over months and years. It rewrites the stories we tell ourselves about who we are and what we are capable of. It starts as pain. It becomes resentment. it becomes obsession. And if nothing interrupts it, if no one sees it and names it and challenges it, it becomes something that destroys everything it touches, including, in the end, the person who fed it. The confession took investigators by surprise, not because James was reluctant to give it, but because of how he gave it, calmly, methodically, with a clarity and a composure that felt almost surreal given the magnitude of what he was describing. He walked them through everything. The months of watching Daniel's social media, the friend request, the 2 years of online friendship, the failed invitations, the decision to use a mutual contact to manufacture a reason for Daniel to come willingly, the planning, the location, the roles assigned to each accomplice. He described the kidnapping, the photographs, the ransom demand, the family's desperate response. And then, with the same calm composure he had maintained throughout, he described the moment in that dark room when he decided that Daniel had to die. And then he explained why. He said that watching Daniel post his expensive lifestyle on social media, publicly, constantly, without any apparent awareness of how it looked to people like James, had felt like a provocation. Not an intentional one, but a provocation nonetheless. He said that watching his childhood friend live in luxury while his mother sold food on a street corner and his father destroyed his body carrying firewood while working 10 times harder than Daniel's family ever had, was something he had never been able to make peace with. He said he had wanted to build his mother a house, had wanted to see his father rest, had wanted just once to give his parents something back for everything they had given him. He said he felt that he equally deserved the things that Daniel had. The investigators listened to all of it, and then they asked him the question that everyone in that room was waiting to hear answered. Do you deserve mercy? James was quiet for a long moment, the kind of quiet that fills a room completely. And then, clearly, simply, without hesitation, he said no. He said that what he had done was too bad, that he understood that he was not asking for mercy because he knew he had not earned the right to ask. In that moment, sitting in chains in a fluorescent-lit interrogation room, James arrived somewhere he should have arrived long before any of this happened. At the truth, not the truth he had constructed for himself over months of envy and planning and moral disengagement. The real truth, that Daniel had done nothing wrong, that his parents had done nothing wrong, that the universe's unfairness, real as it was, had never been Daniel's fault, and that the house James had wanted to build for his mother would now never be built, because the road he had chosen, the road that had felt so logical, so justified, so necessary at every single step, had led him here, to chains, to a confession, to the end of everything. As of today, this case remains under active investigation. James and his accomplices are in custody. The legal process is moving forward with the weight and the gravity that a case like this demands. Justice. Daniel's family is doing what families in their situation are forced to do. They are surviving, trying to rebuild something resembling a normal life around an absence that will never stop being felt. A mother who raised her son with love and hope and every advantage she could provide is now planning a burial instead of a future. And somewhere on the other side of the city, James's mother still wakes before sunrise, still sets up her food stall on the same street corner. The house James wanted to build for her will never be built. Not because the dream was wrong. The dream was not wrong. Wanting to provide for your parents is one of the most beautiful impulses a human being can have. Wanting to correct injustice, to close the gap between what your family has and what they deserve, is not a dark impulse. It is a deeply human one. What was wrong, what was catastrophically, irreversibly wrong, was the direction James pointed that impulse. Inward. It could have become fuel, discipline, determination, the kind of hunger that builds businesses and changes family legacies and makes mothers proud in ways that last for generations. Outward, aimed at Daniel, it became something that destroyed 2 families simultaneously. Daniel's family lost a son. James's family lost a son in a different way, to a prison cell and a confession and a future that no longer exists. Psychologists who study cases like this return again and again to the same conclusion. Envy, left unexamined, unfed, unchallenged, does not stay still. It grows. It finds justifications. It tells stories about fairness and deserving and correcting the universe's mistakes. And if no one interrupts those stories, If the person telling them never stops to question whether the story is true, the ending is always the same. Not triumph, not justice, destruction. Daniel deserved to live. His family deserved their son. James deserved a better story than the one he chose to write for himself. And his parents, who worked their entire lives with dignity and love and exhausting dedication, deserved better than this. This story is not finished. The investigation continues. The courtroom waits. And somewhere in a cell, James sits with the weight of what envy made him become. But Daniel's story, the story of a young man who trusted too completely and paid the highest possible price for that trust, will not be forgotten. Not here. Not on this channel. Not ever. If this story moved you, if it made you think about the quiet, dangerous stories we tell ourselves about what we deserve and what others have, share it with someone today. Because awareness is the only thing that interrupts these stories before they reach their darkest endings. I will see you in the next one.